The air inside my workshop has always smelled of two things: aged oak and turpentine. If you were to look closely at my hands right now, hands that are 60 years old with skin like cured leather, knuckles scarred by wood chisels, and fingernails permanently stained with dark walnut stain, you would see the map of my entire life. For a quarter of a century, these hands have been my only tools of survival. When my husband passed away 25 years ago, leaving me alone with a toddler in a drafty house in western Massachusetts, the world became a very steep hill. I didn't care about the splintered fingers or the aching joints in the freezing winters. Every time I lifted a heavy slab of timber, every time I spent hours sanding down a cracked tabletop until it gleamed, I wasn't just restoring furniture, I was buying a future. My son, Julian, was the center of that future. I remember the nights I sat on a wooden bench under the dim desk lamp, sewing patches onto his clothes while he slept, whispering to myself that he would never have to know what it feels like to break your back just to keep the lights on. And he made it. He climbed out of this small, sawdust-coated town and planted himself firmly in the gleaming glass towers of Manhattan. Today, at 32, he is an architect and a senior project development director for Vanguard Real Estate, moving in circles of wealth and influence that I could only ever dream of watching from afar. I was so proud of him. I thought all those years of sleeping on park benches between odd repair jobs had finally borne their ultimate fruit. Then came the mail delivery that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning when the postal worker handed me a thick, heavy envelope. It wasn't just heavy because of the heavy cardstock. It felt heavy with the gravity of a life milestone. It was a cream-colored wedding invitation, embossed with genuine 24-karat gold lettering printed by an exclusive boutique studio in Manhattan. My son was getting married. The venue was the prestigious Oak Ridge Country Club, a sprawling sanctuary of manicured lawns and high society, where the wedding celebration alone was rumored to cost $150,000. He was marrying into the Sterling family, a dynastic name in American real estate, anchored by billionaire patriarch Richard Sterling. I sat at my old wooden kitchen table, tracing my rough, calloused fingertips over the raised gold lettering, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I thought, this is it. This is the reward. I immediately began to prepare. In my small closet, my options were stark: old flannel shirts, faded denim, and a single, elegant, long coat made from a sturdy tweed fabric I had salvaged decades ago from one of my husband's finest winter coats. I thought about wearing that coat. I thought about showing up with my hair neatly combed, carrying a handmade wooden rocking chair that I had secretly restored for months, a 19th century walnut antique that I had brought back to life piece by piece, sanding away the decades of decay until the grains sang with warm golden undertones. I wanted him to see my heart. I wanted him to see that his mother respected the magnitude of his big day. 3 days before the ceremony, my phone rang. I picked it up with a hopeful smile, expecting to share a warm laugh with my boy. Instead, Julian's voice cut through the speaker like a shard of ice. There was no greeting, no warmth, just the sharp, clipped tone of a corporate executive dealing with an inconvenient crisis. "Mom, listen to me very carefully," Julian said, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic.
We need to talk about the wedding. You cannot show up looking like a relic from a construction site. This is the Oak Ridge Country Club. Sarah's family is elite, and my new business partners will be watching every single person in attendance. I cannot have you wearing those awful, dusty work clothes or that pathetic old coat of yours. It looks dirty. It looks poor. The words hit my chest like a physical blow. But before I could even draw a breath to defend myself, he pressed on, offering a solution that felt infinitely more humiliating. "I just transferred $500 into your bank account," Julian continued, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "Go to the nearest suburban shopping mall, buy a cheap generic polyester dress off the clearance rack, and blend into the background. For once in your life, Mom, just don't embarrass me." The line went dead with a sharp click. I sat in the silence of my workshop for a long time, listening to the steady ticking of the old wall clock. Slowly, I walked over to my desk and checked my phone screen. The notification from the bank showed a direct deposit of $500. I stared at the numbers for a long moment, feeling a cold numbness spread through my fingers. I didn't touch the money. I didn't transfer it. I didn't spend a single cent of it. Instead, I looked down at my hands, the hands that had built his childhood, paid his college tuition, and carved a life out of raw wood.
If my son wanted an image, I would give him an authentic one. I walked back to my workbench, picked up my polishing cloth, and began to put the final, flawless touches on the antique walnut rocking chair, my wedding gift to him. And for my own attire, I picked up the heavy sewing shears, walked over to the rack holding the durable tweed fabric of my late husband, and began to meticulously stitch together a long, elegant coat by hand. I had no idea what awaited me at the gates of Oak Ridge, but I was about to walk into that sanctuary of wealth, carrying the unyielding dignity of a mother who had nothing left to hide. The 3-hour bus ride from my small town to the outskirts of Boston was long, quiet, and filled with the steady hum of the engine and my own racing thoughts. When the bus finally pulled up to the main road, I stepped down into the crisp afternoon air, carrying my canvas tote bag containing the walnut rocking chair. Ahead of me loomed the grand wrought iron gates of the Oak Ridge Country Club. Even from a distance, the place looked like a fortress of privilege. Sleek black Bentleys and silver Porsches glided smoothly up the long, winding driveway, driven by valets in crisp uniforms who scurried back and forth under the grand portico. I smoothed down the lapels of the tweed coat I had stitched by hand, took a deep breath, and began walking up the paved incline on foot, determined to witness my son's happiest day. As I passed beneath the grand entrance arch, the contrast hit me instantly. The lobby was a cathedral of high society, smelling faintly of expensive French perfume, freshly cut white roses, and old money. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, scattering prisms of light across polished marble floors, where guests in custom tuxedos and designer evening gowns moved with effortless grace. And then there was me, an older woman in a handmade tweed coat, standing awkwardly in the middle of a room built for people who had never known a hard day of physical labor in their lives. I tried to make myself as small as possible, clutching the handles of my worn leather bag, and found an empty, high-backed velvet chair tucked into a dim corner near the double doors, hoping I could simply blend into the shadows until the ceremony began. The invisible walls of that elite room closed in on me before long. The whispers started almost immediately, carried by the careful, polite laughter of upper-class circles. Near the center platform where the champagne flutes were being stacked stood Julian's mother-in-law-to-be,
Eleanor Sterling. She was a stately, formidable woman draped in a rich emerald velvet gown, her throat glittering with diamonds that caught every flicker of the chandeliers. I watched as her sharp, hawk-like eyes swept across the room, landing squarely on me. Her gaze lingered on my scuffed shoes, traveled up the textured fabric of my coat, and took in my tired, unpainted face. She didn't look angry, she looked amused, the way a person might look at a stray animal that had wandered into a clean house. Eleanor leaned over to her sister, whispering something behind a manicured hand before letting out a sharp, mocking laugh that carried clearly across the polished floor. The laughter seemed to ripple outward like a stone dropped in still water. A group of Julian's younger cousins and college friends, dressed in sharp Italian suits and holding champagne glasses, turned their attention toward my corner. One young man with slicked back hair nudged his companion, pulled out his smartphone, and casually raised it in my direction. He wasn't just looking at me, he was recording me. A smirk spread across his face as he showed the screen to the others, and they exchanged suppressed snickers, shaking their heads as if watching a pitiful spectacle at a sideshow. The heat rushed to my cheeks, burning under my skin, but I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, refusing to let my eyes drop to the floor. I was his mother. I had every right to be in this room, no matter how desperately they wanted me to vanish. The ambient chatter inside the hall began to fade as the string quartet near the altar swelled into a familiar, solemn processional melody. The heavy oak doors at the front of the aisles swung open, and the groom made his entrance. Julian looked breathtakingly sharp in a midnight blue tuxedo tailored to absolute perfection. He carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man who had successfully rewritten his own origins. For a brief, hopeful second, my heart surged with maternal pride. There was my boy, walking down the aisle towards his new life. But as his gaze swept across the seated guests, his eyes found the corner where I was sitting, and everything shifted in a heartbeat. The moment his eyes locked onto me, his entire expression shattered. The radiant smile he had worn for the crowd vanished instantly, replaced with a dark, ugly scowl of pure, unadulterated disgust. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin, and his fingers dug violently into the fabric of his jacket lapel. It was the exact same look he'd given me 22 years ago when he was a little boy standing outside a bicycle shop window, furious because I couldn't afford the shiny new bike he wanted. It was a look that said I was a disappointment, a burden, a walking reminder of things he wanted buried forever.
He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stared at me with cold, unforgiving rejection before turning his face away to walk toward the altar, leaving me completely alone in the shadows of the grand hall. To them, I was just an embarrassing flaw in an otherwise perfect picture, a mistake to be hitting away from the world before the real performance even began. The hum of polite conversation and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses dissolved into complete background noise the moment I finally stepped out onto the wide, marble-paved terrace. The cool evening air outside was crisp, carrying the faint, distant scent of the manicured gardens, but it offered no real relief to the suffocating tension pressing heavily down on my chest. I desperately needed a moment to breathe, a quiet, hidden corner away from the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers and the curated, predatory smiles of the city's elite. Julian and Victoria were inside, safely cocooned in their glittering world of immense wealth and effortless privilege, playing the part of the devoted power couple before hundreds of distinguished guests. I pressed my back against a cold stone pillar, folding my arms tightly over my chest, hoping the shadows would swallow me whole so I wouldn't have to face another mocking look or a whispered insult from the surrounding crowd. I had spent my entire life working with my hands, shaping raw timber, breathing life back into forgotten antiques, and finding peace in the quiet predictability of wood grain and varnish. This world of high society galas and billion-dollar real estate empires was a foreign galaxy to me, built on a foundation far removed from the honest sweat of physical labor. But I was not here to admire the grand architecture or sip expensive champagne from crystal flutes. I was here because some truths refuse to stay buried under a rug of lies, and some maternal debts cannot be erased simply by throwing money at them from a distance. A sudden, unexpected weight settled firmly onto my right shoulder. It was not the familiar, angry touch of Julian, nor was it the tentative brush of a passing catering waiter trying to clear empty glasses. I stiffened instantly, my muscles locking, as I slowly turned my head, bracing myself for whatever humiliation came next in this hostile environment. Standing right beside me in the dim light was Richard Sterling himself. To the rest of the room, he was an untouchable titan, the billionaire chairman of Vanguard Real Estate, and above all, the proud father of the bride. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that fit him with ruthless perfection, his silver hair combed back with immaculate precision. But it was not his formidable corporate reputation or his sharp posture that made my breath catch in my throat. It was where his eyes had settled with absolute, unblinking focus. Richard was not looking at my face or judging my tired expression. His gaze was fixed with unsettling intensity on my hands, hands that bore the permanent scars, deep calluses, and faint chemical stains of decades of hard manual labor. From there, his eyes drifted slowly upward, tracking the heavy hem of my tweed coat, lingering specifically on the intricate, hidden hand-stitched seams along the edge that I had painstakingly sewn myself during the long, lonely nights. For a long, agonizing moment, neither of us spoke a single word. The ambient noise of the cocktail party seemed to fade into a vacuum. I could feel the blood rushing furiously in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to pull away, to hide the undeniable evidence of what I truly was beneath this borrowed roof. Then Richard moved. Without a single trace of mockery or upper-class condescension, he slowly reached out and lightly touched the edge of the fabric on my coat with the tip of his finger. His expression wasn't of disgust, it was pure, calculated curiosity, deep respect, and sudden intrigue. "This stitching," Richard murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that cut straight through the chill of the evening air. "This hidden needlework technique, I have only ever seen it practiced by master craftsmen specializing in high-end leather and timber restoration in Europe over 30 years ago. Who are you?" The question hung between us, heavy and demanding an answer, carrying the weight of a trap I didn't see coming. My fingers trembled slightly against the cold stone. I forced myself to meet his piercing gaze, keeping my voice as steady as I possibly could, while the memories of my decades of sacrifice flashed vividly before my eyes. "I am Martha," I replied, my voice barely carrying over the outdoor wind. "I work with wood and interior restoration, sir." Richard's eyes widened sharply, a flash of profound realization and shock breaking through his normally impenetrable corporate composure.
He opened his mouth, drawing in a sharp breath to say something more, to dig deeper into the sudden mystery of my presence in his world. Before a single other syllable could escape his lips, the heavy glass doors of the terrace burst violently open with a deafening crash, shattering the fragile silence of the night.
The heavy crunch of gravel outside didn't belong to the smooth, rhythmic steps of invited guests. It was the heavy, uneven drag of someone completely losing their grip on reality. I didn't need to turn around to feel the brutal shift in the air. The massive oak doors of the grand hall swung wide open with a resounding thud, and the suffocating weight of Julian's panic rolled into the room long before he even crossed the threshold. His eyes, bloodshot, wide, and entirely unhinged, scanned the packed terrace until they locked straight onto Martha. She was standing quietly near the edge of the stone balustrade, her weathered, calloused hands gently holding out a small, carefully wrapped canvas bundle, as she exchanged a few quiet words with Richard Sterling. Julian didn't care about the room full of elite faces turning to watch. He didn't care that the billionaire chairman of Vanguard Real Estate was standing right there, observing every single twitch with a cool, assessing gaze. He crossed that polished marble floor like a predator cornered by its own desperate lies. Before Martha could even register his approach or finish her sentence, Julian's hand shot out with terrifying speed, brutally clamping onto her thin, fragile wrist and yanking her backward with a violence that made several nearby high society guests gasp aloud and instinctively step away. His voice wasn't just a shout, it was a venomous, guttural hiss that tore straight through the murmurs of the cocktail party, carrying far enough for everyone in the immediate radius to catch every single cruel, degrading syllable. He didn't care who heard him. He only cared about shielding his pathetic, manufactured illusion of wealth from crumbling into dust. Martha stumbled hard, her frail body entirely caught off balance by the sudden, brutal jerk. Tears instantly welled on her tired eyes, spilling hot and fast down her deeply lined cheeks. The humiliation washed over her like freezing water, but beneath the shock was the far heavier, breaking heart of a mother who simply could not comprehend how the sweet boy she had raised from the ashes had turned into this cold, unrecognizable monster. She choked back a desperate sob, holding up the small package with trembling, calloused fingers, her voice barely a whisper against the roaring wind. "I just wanted to bring you a blessing, Julian. I built this for you with my own 2 hands." Julian didn't even glance down at the offering. He didn't care about the hundreds of hours of lonely labor carved into every grain of the wood. With a vicious, swinging swipe of his arm, he knocked the package straight out of her grip. It slammed down onto the hard stone floor with a sharp, sickening crack. The tiny, handcrafted wooden rocking chair she spent weeks perfecting shattered instantly into useless, broken splinters. Without missing a single beat, without a shred of human decency, he placed both hands squarely against her chest and shoved with all his might. The raw force of the push sent Martha staggering backward, her legs tangling helplessly beneath her, before she collapsed hard on the freezing stone right at the threshold of the grand hall. The silence that fell over the terrace was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. People stopped breathing. They whispered behind gloved hands and lowered their crystal champagne flutes, watching in stunned horror as an old, defenseless woman lay sprawled out on the ground. Julian's chest heaved like a cornered beast, but instead of rushing forward to help his mother, his expression shifted in a terrifying heartbeat. The homicidal rage vanished,
instantly replaced by a sickening, servile desperation as he whipped his head around to face Richard Sterling. His face was completely drained of all color, his palms sweating as he forced a tight, trembling, pathetic smile, desperate to salvage his social standing. "I am beyond sorry, Richard. She she suffers from severe mental instability. She always finds a way to track me down and ruin everything with her poverty and pathetic delusions." Richard Sterling did not move a single muscle. He stood completely frozen, his expression resembling carved granite, arms crossed tightly over his chest as he watched Julian cast out the very woman who had given him life. Richard's dark eyes remained locked on Julian, cold, piercing, and entirely unreadable. Julian didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on the billionaire, looked down at the trembling figure huddled on the floor, pointed a shaking finger toward the dark iron dates in the distance, and delivered the final executioner's blow. "Get out. Don't you ever dare show your face in front of me again." With a deafening slam, the heavy glass doors closed.
I turned away from the grand glass doors, feeling the bitter night wind bite straight through my thin clothes as I began the long, quiet walk toward the dark gravel parking lot. My legs felt heavy, weighed down by an exhaustion that went far deeper than my bones, a lifetime of quiet endurance catching up with me all at once. In the distance, far beyond the gleaming iron gates of the estate, the city bus stop waited in the shadows, a lonely shelter where I could nurse my shattered pride and piece together whatever fragments of dignity I had left after everything that had just happened inside the courtyard. Before I could reach the edge of the dark drive, the sharp, hurried clicking of high heels echoed rapidly behind me on the pavement, cutting sharply through the silence of the night. A hand gently caught my arm, stopping me in my tracks. I looked back, blinking through the heavy tears that still blurred my vision. Running toward me across the gravel, completely unconcerned about the immaculate train of her white designer wedding gown dragging in the dust, was Sarah. Right beside her strode her father, Richard Sterling, his face carved into a mask of cold, unrelenting determination. There was no mockery in their eyes, no trace of the casual cruelty I had grown so used to enduring from my own flesh and blood over the years. Instead, Sarah's gaze burned with fierce indignation, while Richard's eyes held a deep, unyielding gravity that entirely defied the glittering superficiality of the world inside the hall. Without a single word of hesitation, Richard unfastened his heavy, expensive cashmere scarf from his own neck and gently draped it over my shivering shoulders, wrapping me in an unexpected warmth I hadn't felt in decades. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on my arm, signaling absolute authority and quiet, unshakable solidarity against the injustice that had just unfolded on the stone terrace. They spoke softly, expressing their absolute disgust at Julian's years of deceit and their profound respect for the honest labor etched into the calluses of my palms. Side by side, the billionaire real estate titan and his daughter escorted me back through the heavy glass doors and straight into the heart of the glittering ballroom. The moment we stepped inside, the ambient chatter and the tinkling of crystal glasses began to die down, ripple by ripple, as the hundreds of wealthy guests noticed our return and stared in absolute bewilderment at the unexpected trio standing before them under the chandelier lights. Richard walked with purposeful strides straight toward the raised stage at the front of the hall, where the microphone stood ready under the blinding lights.
With a single sharp gesture, he tapped the mic, and the live music cut off instantly, plunging the massive banquet room into an electric, dead silence. 300 elite investors, corporate partners, and high society socialites turned their heads in unison, as stunned confusion as the most powerful man in the room prepared to dismantle the entire foundation of the evening. His voice boomed effortlessly through the speakers, sharp, commanding, and carrying the unvarnished truth about the master artisan standing quietly by the entrance, exposing every single lie Julian had spent years constructing, detailing how a devoted single mother had broken her back in sawdust and shadows to fund every single step of her ungrateful son's climb to the top. The air in the room grew suffocatingly thin. Julian stood frozen near the head table, his face turning a terrifying shade of ash white, his mouth opening and closing silently as the walls of his carefully curated empire began to crumble around him in front of everyone he had tried to impress. Then came the final devastating blow. Richard looked down from the stage, his gaze locking directly onto the paralyzed groom, announcing the immediate and permanent termination of the $45 million green building development contract with Vanguard Real Estate, declaring to the entire room that a man lacking the basic conscience to honor his own mother had no business standing among them or doing business with his firm. Before the shockwave of that public execution could even settle over the paralyzed room, Sarah stepped forward. With a sharp, decisive motion, she ripped the heavy diamond engagement ring from her finger and hurled it across the polished marble floor, declaring with absolute coldness that she could never tie her life to a monster. It clattered loudly against the wood, rolling to a stop right at Julian's trembling feet, as a silent, absolute rejection of everything he claimed to be. Julian stared down at the ring, completely ruined, stripped of his wealth, his bride, and his future in a single, merciless heartbeat.
The wedding hall did not echo with applause. It echoed with the heavy, sickening thud of absolute ruin. As the truth of Julian's betrayal spilled from those massive screens, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The murmurs started like a rising tide, sharp, biting, and laced with absolute contempt. High society elites, the very people Julian had spent years licking boots to impress, turned their backs in unison. Champagne flutes were set down untouched, designer coats were pulled tight against the chill of disgrace. Business partners didn't just cancel meetings, they severed ties before the night was even over, terrified that the stench of Julian's deceit would stain their own reputations. I stood near the exit, watching it all unfold, my heart remarkably still. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to throw a single punch. The weight of his own calculated greed had crushed him far better than any revenge ever could. Julian dropped to his knees right there on the polished marble floor of the reception hall. His face was completely drained of color, his jaw slack, staring blindly at the empty space where his empire had just dissolved into ash. Manhattan's rising star architect, a man who believed he was untouchable, had fallen entirely in a single night. That very same night, as the city lights blurred through the rain outside, a sleek black luxury sedan waited quietly at the curb. A chauffeur in a crisp suit stepped out, holding the rear door open for me. He handed me a heavy card embossed with silver lettering, along with a message straight from Richard Vance. "Martha,
I am backing the largest high-end artisanal woodwork restoration center in the Northeast. I need an art director with a soul and golden hands like yours. Will you partner with me?" I looked at the card, then out at the glittering skyline. For the first time in decades, my hands didn't feel heavy with sacrifice. They felt ready to create. Months bled into one another, turning the bitter winter into a quiet spring. I was inside the familiar, comforting warmth of my old carpentry workshop, surrounded by the rich scent of fresh cedar and the sharp, bright glow of a welding torch when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The pathetic, ragged breathing gave him away instantly. Julian had withered into a ghost of his former self. His frame was gaunt and hollowed out, his designer suits replaced by cheap, damp clothing that hung off his shoulders. Fired from every firm, abandoned by the woman who only loved his wallet, and drowning under a mountain of crushing debts, he dragged himself across my threshold. He collapsed onto the wooden floorboards, weeping with a desperate, ugly sound, begging for my forgiveness, pleading for me to save what was left of his ruined life. I paused my work, the torch hissing softly as I set it down. I walked slowly to the frosted glass door, looking at my son one final time through the pane. I opened the door, reached down and took his trembling hands, lifting him up onto his own 2 feet, just like I used to when he was a little boy falling off his bicycle. But the moment he tried to step inside, I gently let go of his hands. My voice was steady, calm, and completely washed of pain. "I forgive you, Julian, because if I don't forgive you, I would have to carry poison in my own heart, but I cannot let you back into my life. Dignity and self-respect are not pieces of furniture that can simply be glued back together after you take a hammer to them. You have to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, the exact same way I once had to." Without waiting for his answer, I pulled the heavy wooden door shut and locked it tight. The latch clicked into place with a definitive, final sound. There was no regret in my chest, only the quiet, beautiful peace of a life finally reclaimed.
The transition from a hidden backroom artisan to a nationally recognized name did not happen overnight, but time has a remarkable, unhurried way of honoring genuine labor and quiet perseverance. Months turned steadily into years, and the old workshop transformed into a true cornerstone of regional craftsmanship. I was no longer just a solitary restorer working in the shadows of obscurity. I became an honored partner in the National Guild of Artisans, working alongside minds that valued true heritage over superficial hype. Our workshop doors remained open to those who truly appreciated the living soul of handmade timber, crafting bespoke restoration pieces for prominent museums, historical archives, and grand heritage estates across the entire country. The deep calluses on my palms remained, but they were no longer badges of invisible suffering or unrewarded toil. They were quiet marks of mastery, resilience, and enduring pride that no one could ever take away from me. Despite the newfound professional recognition, the awards, and the lucrative contracts that followed my partnership with Richard's initiative, I chose to stay anchored to my roots. I still lived in the same modest, familiar apartment where I had raised Julian through every single hardship, not out of any lack of financial means, but because those modest walls held the sacred memory of my most glorious years of labor and survival. My wardrobe changed naturally, reflecting the dignity of my new standing in society.
The worn-out, stained aprons were now complemented by custom-tailored tweed jackets and elegant woolen coats that I proudly stitched for myself on quiet Sunday evenings. Yet among all the fine fabrics and luxuries I could now easily afford, my greatest and most profound joy remained the simple, grounding texture of rough-hewn oak beneath my fingertips as the sun went down. Looking back now across the expanse of time at the chaos of that terrible wedding day, the terrifying exposure, and the public ruin that followed, I no longer see a tragedy that broke my world. That devastating night was not a curse. It was the sharp, precise chisel of fate that finally carved away the last lingering fragments of my blind, destructive maternal devotion. The kind of love that blindly sacrifices its own existence for an ungrateful soul. It liberated me from decades of silent self-abnegation, returning my absolute freedom, my inner peace, and my unshakable dignity. Standing here today, listening to the steady, rhythmic hum of the tools and feeling the warmth of the furnace against my face, the past feels like a distant storm that has long since cleared. The noise of Manhattan's elite, the flashing cameras, and the hollow promises of wealth are nothing more than dust blown away by the wind. I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need an apology. I only needed my own hands back working in the light. I often look at the empty streets outside during the quiet twilight hours and wonder how fragile human ambition truly is when it lacks a soul. People spend their entire existence chasing shadows, building towering glass empires on foundations of sand, and trading their inner integrity for fleeting applause. But true fulfillment cannot be manufactured by public relations campaigns or bought with high society contracts. It is earned through sweat, patience, and the honest creation of things that outlive our temporary existence. Every scratch in the wood tells a story of survival, teaching us that what is broken can be restored if handled with care and truth. There were moments in the beginning when the silence of the apartment felt heavy, echoing with the ghosts of expectations that never materialized. But silence is not empty. It is a canvas waiting for color. In that quietude, I found my voice again, realizing that my life was my own masterpiece to shape, not something to be chipped away by someone else's greed or entitlement. Each morning brought a renewed sense of purpose, reminding me that surviving the worst storm only proves how deep your roots truly go. If there is one enduring truth this entire journey has etched deep into my soul, it's a lesson worth holding on to. A human life is never measured by the gold-plated suits we wear, the titles we inherit, or the expensive invitations we print for a superficial world to see. True worth is measured by the depth of our personal character, the absolute honesty of our working hands, and the quiet, terrifying courage it takes to walk away from toxic things that slowly drain our spirit. Life does not demand perfection from us, but it demands authenticity. When you finally learn to stand tall and respect yourself, the rest of the world, no matter how loud or blinding it may seem, will ultimately have to meet you with profound respect. And that is a peace no amount of money could ever buy.
Before we say goodbye, I want to talk to you for just a moment. Wherever you are right now, what city are you sitting in? And what time is it on your clock as you watch this? Let me know in the comments below so I can see just how far this story traveled to reach you. More importantly, looking at this story, what is the biggest lesson you are taking away today? Is it about the strength to stand back up when everything is stripped away, the courage to walk away from toxic bonds, or the realization that human dignity and self-respect can never be bought with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to know how this resonated with you. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next story. Thank you so much for watching. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.